Good evening, everyone. Last year, we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act 30 days after the death of George Floyd. We passed the bill on what would have been Tamir Rice's 18th birthday, and as you probably remembered, he was killed on his 12th birthday. Today, we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act 30 years after the world saw the brutal beating of Rodney King. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and I remember when that video was released, I thought that was going to be the moment that policing was transformed in the United States, because finally the world would see what had been happening in Black communities for over a century. But there was never a way to document it, and so the story was always the same. The person went for a gun. I was afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. That was the reason for the beating or the shooting. After Rodney King's brutal beating, nothing fundamentally changed in the country. Years later, we had cell phone cameras, and now we have seen video after video after video of people being beat and people being killed. That is the reason for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Two measures of the bill hold police officers accountable, and then other measures of the bill support raising the standards and accreditation process of policing in the United States. I know that change is difficult, but I believe fundamentally that police officers don't want to work in an environment where the culture says if they are to step up, if they are to say anything, if an officer is abusive or as an officer is corrupt, then their very lives could be in danger. So one of the goals of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is to raise the standards of policing in America and also to transform the culture. I am happy to say that we passed this bill in an environment where our country is looking at a racial reckoning. We have a president who, in his inauguration speech, talked about ending racial inequities. He made a commitment to that, and he made a commitment to the transformation of policing in the United States. So I am happy that we were able to do this today. I am confident that we will be able to work with the Senate and that we will put the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act on President Biden's desk. Let me just say that we could not have accomplished anything without outstanding leadership in the House of Representatives. And we are fortunate to have the most powerful woman in the House of Representatives, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was absolutely adamant that we accomplish this last year, that we make a contribution to transforming policing in the United States. And it's my honor to bring up Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Karen Bass has been a relentless champion for justice in America. She saw the challenge that we are facing, and she said there has to be justice in policing. She put together the legislation, working together with members of the Judiciary Committee, on which she serves, working with the distinguished. She doesn't serve. She does serve, yes. She serves on she's so many chairs of so many things, the Foreign Affairs Committee, but working with the distinguished chair, Mr. Nadler, whom I will be pleased to yield to in just a moment, but not before acknowledging, as Karen Bass has its certain landmark dates. Nearly 1 year ago, George Floyd gasped his last words, "I can't breathe," and ignited a nationwide reckoning on the racial injustice and police brutality that exists in our country. I can't breathe. Since then, Americans from every corner of the country, and actually people throughout the world, have taken to the streets to peacefully protest violence against Black Americans. Yet despite these protests, violence continues. We cannot accept this epidemic of injustice, which is why we will pass and send, we have passed now, we have passed and sent to the Senate and to the President the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act so it can become the law of the land. We're proud of this legislation, which will fundamentally transform the culture with bold, unprecedented reforms, some of which the distinguished Chairwoman Bass mentioned. It will not erase centuries of systemic racism and excessive policing, and it will not bring back George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, say her name, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, or the countless others who have been killed or harmed. But it will take a tremendous step forward to stop the violence, stem the suffering, and start to build a better America. We all have respect for our men and women in blue who serve our country, protecting all of us. Said on the floor, many of them leave home to risk their lives, to save lives, to provide protection in our community. Overwhelmingly, they are not part of this culture of violence against African Americans. But nonetheless, our respect for them cannot turn into apathy against what we know is happening, and that must be stopped. It must be stopped. Our colleague Madeleine Dean, when she was on the floor, she talked about "I Can't Breathe" and how George Floyd called out for his mother. His mother. Any mother in the country who heard that had to be so impacted by it. I said on the floor that I think of George Floyd all the time, even when I'm not thinking in terms of this injustice, even when I'm washing my hands and they say wash your hands for 20 seconds in terms of COVID so that your hands are thoroughly washed. And I think I can't do that for 20 seconds. It's taking too much time. 8 minutes and 46 seconds of intentional knee to the neck, a public lynching, an assassination before our very eyes. That's why I said to the family when they asked, "Madam Speaker, will you name the bill for George?" I said, "Only if you think the bill is worthy of that." And they said it was, and they were very pleased that we passed it then, even more pleased when we pass it now, because we have a president in the White House who shares our values of liberty and justice for all. And with that, a person committed to liberty and justice for all, and particularly in the form of this legislation, the distinguished chair of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler of New York.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to begin by thanking Karen Bass, a distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee and most recent chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, for her work in crafting the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and Sheila Jackson Lee, the chair of the Crime Subcommittee, for her work last year and in helping to bring this bill to the floor in this Congress. And of course, I want to thank the Speaker and the rest of the Democratic leadership for their unwavering support of this vital legislation. The House first considered the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act last summer, when the streets were flooded with Americans demanding fundamental change in the culture of law enforcement and meaningful accountability for officers who commit misconduct. Unfortunately, although the House acted swiftly with legislation to meet the moment, the then Republican-led Senate failed to act. But even if some believe the national conversation has moved on since last summer's events, the need to act is just as urgent today. It no longer makes headlines, but every day too many people, disproportionately Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people, people living in poverty, and people with disabilities face harassment and sometimes violence at the hands of too many law enforcement officers. I am proud of all the work that has gone into crafting this legislation, which takes a comprehensive and thoughtful approach to a very complex issue. I'm also pleased to see the wide and growing support behind this legislation from leading civil rights and social justice groups to law enforcement associations, companies, business associations, and many, many more. Last year, I was honored to invite Philanese Floyd, George Floyd's brother, to testify before the Judiciary Committee. He told us of the pain he felt watching the video of his brother being killed by a Minneapolis police officer. He gave voice to the pain that the entire nation felt. He also spoke to the anger of knowing that George Floyd was only the latest in a much too long list of victims of police misconduct, disproportionately people of color. He spoke to the frustration that time and again, in the face of overwhelming evidence that dramatic reform is needed, Congress has done very little. Mr. Floyd charged us with making sure that the death of his brother and other victims of police violence would not be in vain. And he pleaded with us to turn that pain and anger that we all feel into meaningful change. His words echoed the voices of millions of Americans who demand justice and demand action. Today we answer their call. And as we answer their call, I want to comment on a few of the contentions of the Republicans in opposing this bill. They say that it would defund the police. No, it wouldn't. It will clearly not defund the police. That is not the intent of the bill nor the effect of it. All you have to do is read it. Secondly, they say they're very upset at the repeal of qualified immunity in the bill. But you know, qualified immunity, and they talk as if repealing qualified immunity would make the police victims of all kinds of things. But the fact is that qualified immunity is a judge-made doctrine. 40 years ago, you didn't have it. Judicial qualified immunity was invented by the courts only in the last 40 years. And 40 years ago, you had the same problems, but you didn't have police officers being drawn and quartered or losing their homes and all these other things that the Republicans would make you fear. So the legislation is very carefully drafted. It's timely, it's for the moment, and it is very, very necessary. And I thank the leadership of the House for supporting this bill, and I have the honor to introduce the Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Hoyer, who has been instrumental in supporting this legislation and so many other good things.
Thank you very much, Chairman Nadler. I want to congratulate Karen Bass. Karen Bass, as you know, is the former Speaker of the California Assembly, an extraordinarily talented legislator, and a legislator who works not only among her colleagues but across the aisle in a very constructive way. And I am confident that with Karen Bass's leadership, we're going to pass it through the United States Senate, working with Republicans and Democrats. Speaker Bass, I know you're going to get that done, and I'm looking forward to that day. I remember, as we all remember, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But I'm old enough to also remember Rodney King. And although there were not cell phones, somebody did take a moving picture of it, a video. A man lying on the ground, helpless. The batons swinging, swinging, swinging. And in the final analysis, no accountability. That's not America. Speaker Pelosi mentioned a lynching. And you may have said, no, he wasn't hung. Very frankly, when I was told some 2 years ago that we hadn't passed an anti-lynching statute, I was amazed, and I went to Karen. Karen was then chairman, and I said, why haven't we passed an anti-lynching? And we started working on it, and we passed it. And we included it in this bill as well. I needed to look it up in the dictionary. Lynching is the taking of a life without legal sanction. Not necessarily a hanging. It's famously done over and over and over by hanging, by throwing a rope over a tree limb and lifting somebody up and letting them hang there until dead. That's not America. And this bill speaks to the values of America. That we cannot take lives without cause, without legal justification. Because we honor life. a lot of people who didn't vote for this bill didn't honor life in that vote. I was pleased, along with the Speaker, to bring the House back on June 25th, which was about, what was the date Floyd was killed? In any event, it was about a month after. May 25th, so just about exactly a month after.
30 days.
Karen Bass worked from May 26th, along with the Congressional Black Caucus, along with Mr. Nadler, along with others, to put a bill together that would respond. Not a year later, not 2 years later, not forget about it. And we brought everybody back a little early on the 25th and passed that bill and sent it to the Senate. Sadly, like so many bills we sent to the Senate, nothing happened. There was a bill that they came up with, they put on the floor, it didn't pass, and they didn't work. We're going to work. Karen Bass is going to work across the aisle. We want this bill to be law. This is not a message bill. This is a bill to change conduct, to make it so that black mothers don't have to be talking to black sons on how to act and how to stay out of trouble. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I spoke strongly for it on the floor. I'm glad it passed. It was, unless that vote was changed, it was a bipartisan vote. We got one Republican. Did they stick? The last time? They stuck. We will now go from here, and we will see that bill go to the Senate, and I will urge Chuck Schumer, and Dick Durbin, the chairman of the committee,
Yes.
to make this a priority. And I know that Speaker Bass is working with Senator Scott before this and is going to continue to work with him and appeal to his knowledge of history and of fairness so that we can pass this bill. Now I'm pleased to, Mr. Clyburn's not here, but the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, a dear friend of mine, I called her the Joyce Beatty from the Ohio State. Joyce Beatty.
Thank you, Standing Warrior. First of all, let me just say what an honor it is to stand here tonight with our leadership, Speaker Pelosi. But to you, Madam Congresswoman Karen Bass, thank you for your leadership and your partnership, because that's what the message is we're sending tonight. The partnership between our leadership, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Judiciary Committee. You have heard and you will hear 8 minutes, 46 seconds. I can't breathe. A knee on my neck. Whether we say George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or from my district, Casey Goodson, Andre Hill, or Tamir Rice. That is what I want you to remember. Why? We fought so hard to get this bill right, and why we are so proud to stand here tonight. We cannot bring back their loss or the pain their families and friends have faced, but we can fight for transparency, for accountability, for justice. And let me just say, as I stood with some of my colleagues with George Floyd's family tonight, we do this in remembrance and honor of him and all those who have lost their lives senselessly at the hands of law enforcement. But I want you to remember, no matter what anyone says, this bill is about justice, transparency, accountability. And lastly, in the words of his 7-year-old daughter, when she said, "My daddy has changed the world." Tonight, I say, as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, we stand with our colleagues as we change the world. And that is our power, our message. Thank you.
And now we will hear from the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Judiciary, Crime and Terrorism. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Bass, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you to our leaders and as well the Congressional Black Caucus. We worked as a team, and the Judiciary Committee worked as a team. Let me say that this was so important to the Floyd family that they wanted to be present to be able to see the fruition, if you will, of the sacrifice of their brother. For he was sacrificed in a calculated killing, murder on the streets of America. A murder that evidenced itself around the world with a grin, a smirk on the actor, the police officer that was causing his death and causing the words, "I can't breathe." And so I want to say to his late parents, his mother, who I got to engage in our congressional district where they grew up, Lacinia Jones Floyd, his late mother, their late father, George Perry Floyd, and of course the beautiful daughter who acknowledged that her daddy was a tree shaker and one who could be a mountain climber. His siblings, Thelonious Floyd, Zaza Williams, LaTanya Floyd, Rodney Floyd, Bridget Floyd, Terrence Floyd, and his nephew, Brandon Williams. We do this in their name and the names of all of the families who have lost loved ones violently, without charges, even allegations, but fell to their death at the hands of those who were to protect and serve. Let me clearly say that on the day of insurrection, none of us ignored the bravery of police officers. I will not accept the attack on those who support George Floyd's Justice and Policing Act, that we are against police. We honor those who stand to defend. We honor those who have gone ahead to the bravery of supporting and defending those who need that. And then those who are engaged in misconduct, that is who this bill addresses. The tragic death of George Floyd has awakened the world and the nation to the gross injustice that too many African Americans face on a daily basis. I want to add to the fact of the naysayers that qualified immunity and its removal thereof will hurt police. Absolutely not. I'll give you a simple expression of what it is. The qualified immunity that is a fixture and a made-up concept of courts, not a statutory concept. All it does, as it is modified, is to open the door of justice, not only for police who can walk through it, but for victims who can walk through it. That is all that we do in this bill. It doesn't diminish any officer's ability to serve. In fact, it enhances their ability to serve, because then they begin to look at those that they are protecting in an equal manner, that each of them will have a right to go into court. So what is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? What is the evidence of righteous protesters across the world, millions who stood in line to march to support this bill? And it is a transformational and bold reform on policing practices. It is the civil rights law of policing. So with our vote today, we're saying that Black Lives Matter, we're saying that America matters, and we're making a difference. I believe that this bill will find a home in the United States Senate, and it will pass. Finally, let us be reminded, as we have all said, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, terrifying, unspeakable, feeling that you could not breathe and no one would listen to you, and having your life sucked from you on the streets of America, no one to comfort you, no way to say goodbye, no way to get up, no way to have relief. No officer that was there intervened to stop this individual with a smirk on their face from doing the wrong thing. And so I just want to conclude by saying that the effective enforcement of the law and administration of justice requires that the confidence in the community is equal to the confidence in the law. We must have confidence in the law. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act does that. It does it now. It's time to pass it. We will pass it in the United States Senate, and we will get it signed by the President of the United States.
And finally, let me introduce our esteemed chair of the Democratic Caucus, and let me congratulate him for an incredible 2 days issues conference that we just had, Representative Chairman Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, thank you so much, and let me just congratulate Karen Bass and thank her on her tremendous leadership in leading the charge and shepherding this incredibly important effort forward, and for your thoughtfulness, for your intellectual firepower, for your consensus-building efforts that will only continue to make sure that this bill gets over the finish line. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is about accountability. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is about liberty and justice for all. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is about equal protection under the law. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is about making sure that every single American, regardless of race, can experience life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is about continuing America's long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I believe we have to go for our vote. If there's one or two questions, can you tell me if they're on the MTR or if they're on final passage? Okay. Did you guys vote already for MTR?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I did. But can you stay for a minute? Or?
I'll stay for a minute.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. I wanted to know what your discussions are like, negotiations with Senator Scott that Congressman Leader Hoyer mentioned, and then what agreements, how do you think you can work with Republicans? What ground can you find, and then what is a little bit tougher there?
Well, you know, I won't tell you about my negotiations with Tim Scott, but I will tell you that we have been in conversation. What happened after we passed the bill the last time is a group of us, a bipartisan group of us, many whom were problem solvers, started meeting and started looking for potential areas of agreement because many of our Republican colleagues said they thought they could get to yes on this, but they had some difficulties. One of the things that has happened in the last 12 months, though, is that many states moved ahead without us, and they started passing reforms. So this time when we sit down to meet, we can talk about reforms that are already in place, such as in Colorado, qualified immunity has been reformed. I spoke to Governor Polis, our former colleague. So we have a lot of basis in which to begin discussions, and that's what we plan to do. Yes.
This has turned out not to be a bipartisan passage. I don't know if you saw the one Republican who did vote yes brought his vote back and said that he was voting no.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So just, as you go to reach out to Republicans, particularly how partisan the United States Senate has become with the goal of getting 10 Republican votes, how do you make that case to them to bring them over and convince them that this is a legislation?
I think the case will be made here with a bipartisan group of legislators that will then take it to the Senate. And again, my conversations never stopped with Tim Scott. So, and my Republican colleagues understood we were doing it this way. The only other way to do it is to go through regular order, and that would be very counterproductive. And so we did not choose that route. So I spoke to them. They weren't happy about the process that we used. They understood it. Our relationships are still fine. And so I think that we'll be okay to have the conversations.
I'm just doing
Sure, go ahead.
just very briefly, and I'll step away. In spite of what is perceived to be a contentious Senate, and one would say it's a contentious House. We just passed it in the House. I do think there is a pathway to pass it because we have already a widespread evidentiary pathway. We've had more killings. We've shown police misconduct. I believe Republicans in the Senate and Democrats want to do the right thing. I think the qualified immunity can become not an obstacle when you explain it that it is not taking away rights, it is simply opening the door for expanded rights. The transparency, the accountability should not be anything that Republicans are opposed to. I'll be joining the Congresswoman in collaborating, helping, trying to reach out to those that I may know in particular, to be able to say that this is not a harmful bill. It is, in fact, a bill that simply enforces better community police relationships, not orientation, but relationships. Who would not want to improve the opportunity for police to do their job? It uplifts accreditation. It encourages police officers to secure their higher degrees. So I think we have something to offer to the Senate, and they might just buy it. I think they will.
Go vote.
Thank you.
Let me acknowledge that Representative Barbara Lee was here, Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, and Representative Brenda Lawrence, but they had to leave to go vote. Yes.
Really quickly, a couple of your colleagues have grown frustrated enough that they've started trying to put some pressure on the Senate to eliminate the filibuster. I mean, Democrats, right now you've got only 2 years guaranteed with the House, the Senate, and the White House. What are your thoughts on sort of removing that barrier so Democrats can make real changes in the next 2 years?
Well, I certainly hope that it doesn't come to that. I do hope that on the major initiatives that we need to pass through the House, such as the Rescue Act, well, the Rescue Act, that will probably be partisan. But I am hoping that my Republican colleagues come around, because there's so much that needs to be done in the country. So I hope that it doesn't come to that. It might. I hope it doesn't.
What's like the barrier for when it does come to that? Is there like a
Well,
line in the sand that at some point you're just like,
Well, you know, I mean, I think all of us might have our own individual lines in the sand, but, you know, I couldn't tell you if this policy doesn't pass, then that's the line in the sand for me. It's fine for it to be the line in the sand for me, but I'm over here in the House. I don't get to participate in that particular decision. And then it's nice to say that when you're in power, but you just described that we're guaranteed 2 years. We're not guaranteed any more than that. So we make a change like that, and then what happens? So I'm certainly hoping that in the midterm we defy history and we actually pick up seats, but who knows? Okay.
Can I just ask you what your thoughts are about the votes being canceled for tomorrow and this vote moved up today because of the threat, and what type of message you think that sends?
Well, I mean, I think that it was easier for us to just go ahead and get all of our business done. As you know, tomorrow begins the Republican Issues Conference, and so I think that there were a multitude of reasons. But I do have to acknowledge the fact that many of my colleagues and staff, and maybe even some of you who were there during the insurrection, people are deeply concerned about what potential threats could be out there. And it's not just threats here, but it's us coming here. It's we all live out in the community. And so you have heard already from the Capitol Police that threats are up 90% to members of the House. So I think it's reasonable that we just went ahead and finished our work. Last question.
A lot of people talk about with January 6th, kind of the difference in how strong the police response was versus if maybe the people who were entering Capitol looked differently. Did that idea energize this at all, or do you think that made your job easier, that there was this very visible instance of sort of a lot of white people?
No, actually, it didn't. I don't think it came to play, but I do want to say something about January 6th and the relationship between this bill and that. For generations, Black people have been trying to raise the issue that white supremacy is a problem in some police departments. And in the Los Angeles area, for example, in our sheriff's department, every few years we have a problem with organized gangs. Sheriffs that become gang members, that start their own gangs, tattoos, the whole 9 yards. And those gangs are typically white supremacist gangs. And so for the first time, I think now we're going to look at that. Look at white supremacists, whether individuals or organized elements, not just in law enforcement, but also in the military. It's just, to me, it was a Rodney King moment. There was a videotape that revealed what we had been trying to say for 100 years, and there was an insurrection that exposed what we have been suffering from for so many years. Thank you very much.